Let's begin our presentation. How to create an internal talent market through reskilling and redeployment. This conversation will be about how to make redeployment part of your company's DNA. This session covers why companies are rewriting their restructuring playbooks, developing a redeployment rulebook that capitalizes on untapped potential, how companies can realize significant cost savings while still investing in your people, the BAE Systems story and how they got ahead of the curve. We want this session to be as interactive as possible. I encourage you to enter your questions in the Q&A box throughout the presentation. Hosting today's discussion is JC Townend, CEO for LHH over UK and Ireland. JC, over to you.
Thanks very much, and thanks for joining today. I'm JC Townend. I'm CEO for the UK and Ireland of LHH. Many of you will know who LHH is, but many of you may not. We are the world's largest provider of outplacement programs, and we also help companies realize the full potential of their people, helping their employees to navigate change, become better leaders, develop better careers, and transition into new jobs. I'm delighted today to be joined by Paul Scofield, Head of Employee Relations for BAE Systems in the UK, where they have about 34,000 employees of their global 84,000 employees. Welcome, Paul. Why don't we start by you telling us a little bit about your background and your role at BAE Systems?
Thank you, JC. Hi. So I'm Paul Scofield. I work in employee relations in the UK part of BAE Systems, and I joined nearly over 30 years ago in 1989. And apart from a short time in Airbus, I've worked with BAE Systems all my life, and that's not unusual in BAE Systems. A lot of employees can work for a significant length of time with our company. Currently, I'm enjoying or living with lockdown with my family in Manchester, and that's been obviously a very difficult time for everybody to live through. And back in the day, I started out in operations with BAE Systems, and then moved into HR, and then latterly into employee relations. I look after a number of businesses in terms of providing an employee relations support service, and also I cover the UK for any matters of redeployment and restructuring.
Great, thank you. Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about BAE Systems and the industry they're in, and why that makes it so ripe for really needing to be in a constant state of disruption, and why this makes redeployment such a good solution for you guys.
Okay, well, BAE Systems, or formerly British Aerospace as it was known, is now a fairly global company, big footprints in the US, Australia, Saudi, and a few other locations across the globe. But it came from the UK originally, and what is significant or interesting about the defence product cycle is it takes place over a significant length of time, and it requires extensive capabilities to be developed and maintained with the technological nature of our products. So we can develop a program over a period of a decade. We can manufacture it for a decade. We can support it in service for 2 decades. People can have entire career lifespans on single products. And with the technical requirements of the products, you know, think whether it's a submarine, a naval warship, a fighter aircraft, you've got immense levels of technical expertise. And I guess the two kind of characteristics that BAE Systems has for supporting kind of redeployment in difficult times is that it has an opportunity to look ahead on the horizon for problems coming our way and seeing we can head off that by redeployment. And also it has a high need to retain capability. And people who have significant lengths of service with us will know a lot of things that we need for future programs. So whilst one program might tail off, another might be recruiting and ramping up. And what we need to do is find solutions to move people between one program and the next, albeit them having spent literally years, if not decades, on those programs. So we've got those kind of characteristics that lend itself to redeployment.
Yeah, and we're hoping that your experience over the past decade can be useful to our listeners today as they think about whether redeployment during this time of crisis can work for them. How is BAE Systems doing during the current pandemic?
Well, nobody is unaffected by this, and definitely we have been navigating through this. So I can only talk to the UK situation. I will have colleagues who've dealt with this and dealt with the different scenarios that each country's different situation has developed. But for the UK, one of the things that we had to do was we were really worried about our large sites creating an epicenter to the pandemic could center around. So we actually shut down our sites before the government asked us to lock down. And we shut down in order to reset and reset along the social distancing kind of guidelines. And I have to say, we were very quick to get a large area of our activities back up and running, because one of our challenges was the fact that we were expected to continue to deliver through this period. So it's not a matter of the workload dropping off, the workload remained the same. And what we needed to do was ensure that we continue to deliver. And that has come through a combination of social distancing on site and extensive levels of working from home. And the infrastructure and I have to say, the support that we've had from employees, is really helped us make that happen. I mean, for all the things that we can do on systems and social distancing measures and health and safety assessments, what our workforce has done to help us work through this has been fantastic.
Yeah, and what the listeners may not realize is that we're actually in the same offices today, but we are having to socially distance in 2 different rooms. So yeah, I think it's impacting all of us.
It's a strange world that we exist in at the moment. And that is what we're going to obviously have been living with and will have to continue to live with. It is odd.
So let's get into the BAE Systems story and how you first got really into using redeployment as a mechanism in a broad scale in the company. Now, as you were telling me, it was really after the last major global recession, after 2008, and the impacts of that, which I guess started to hit BAE Systems more after a couple of years. And you were telling me you had just gotten back to BAE Systems from another company in 2010 when you were hit with some major redundancies. And that's when this really started. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
So, 2008 was known as the financial crisis, and that then triggered all the kind of financial challenges for governments. That then normally flushes through a few years later for us in terms of defence spending reviews. And we were living with, quite a significant downturn in the defence spending. Still spending on major programmes, but not all of them. And we had some significant restructuring that we needed to do in 2010. However, that restructuring still needed to maintain capability and the ability to put in bids for new projects using the same expertise that other projects were releasing. So I think there is a similarity to that scenario and the scenario we have now, in the fact that it's very easy to just reach for the redundancy button and say, right, we'll come and get that resource, that capability another day when we need it. But it's not so available to you when the time comes. So what we did to try and maximize the number of people that remained in parts of BAE Systems that we're ramping up and recruiting was the kind of key that I think could be applied to this situation for other companies.
Yeah, and we were noticing in the past 3 weeks alone in the British press, there were 38 separate announcements of planned redundancies coming up. And that's why we thought it's a really good time for companies to consider and think about where they, yes, are going to have to make really difficult decisions on redundancies. Nevertheless, are still going to need to be hiring in other areas, and whether there's the opportunity to reskill and redeploy people into those roles and not have quite as painful of an impact. So tell me a little bit about the system for reskilling and redeployment that you set up at BAE Systems, and some of the lessons that our listeners can learn from how that's worked.
I will, but I firstly say that, I absolutely don't doubt that many organisations have no choice about what they need to do in the current situation. It is absolutely horrific. So I don't want to sound like, you've got this option. If you haven't got financial backing or support to retain people, you have to do what you have to do. But I think my learning point, though, from 2010 is that keep an eye on the future. Don't just focus in on the immediate problems that you've got. And if you can persuade people to find routes to transfer and support people to transfer into other jobs, then give them a chance to do it, because don't underestimate the power and the capability that your employees have to offer you in a new role. Specifically for us, we set up arrangements whereby any vacancy in the whole of the UK is available to somebody under the possibility of redundancy. That's not a specific at-risk situation, that's a concern about their future. And we facilitate those employees to have the right to apply and be considered first before any other applicant, be they another internal candidate or an external candidate for those vacancies. And that's a mandated rule that underpins our entire operation for managing resource across the UK, and has done for the past decade.
Mm-hmm. And what if an employee needs to reskill to be able to be eligible for one of those positions?
We are prepared to put a degree of investment into the reskilling of that employee. And often it's less than just reskilling. Often they have the capability to do the job, they just don't know the product area or the specifics of the specific role. So if you've got underpinning skills, you've got a great basis to kind of reorientate to that new product range and or activity, and we're prepared to put that in. And we're prepared to put that time in because another reason is that we can avoid the cost of redundancies through this period as well. So why not retrain? Why avoid the cost of redundancy? And why not give one of your existing employees a chance to stay with you? And how they will feel about your company when you've supported them in that way, I think will be very different than taking redundancy routes.
Sure. I mean, you've got the loyalty, you've saved the onboarding costs. I think there's a lot of really good reasons to try to retain those employees. Now, you used a redeployment portal to help facilitate those exchanges. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
So this is the route by which we give employees the access to those jobs in that priority manner. And so what we've developed in conjunction with LHH is that anybody under a kind of restructuring concern is allowed to have access to a redeployment portal that is essentially the LHH CRN portal, stripped down to allow people to focus on internal jobs. So we don't give them the full access to the outside world, the vacancies, but we give them the tools to help them apply for internal jobs to the best of their ability. So that contains tools like CV writing tools, interview preparation tools, and also the job vacancy lists themselves. And that when they apply through that application gets tagged up, and then it receives that priority treatment and is available for the training and reskilling support that comes with that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I didn't mean to make it about our partnership. More, I think you now have a decade of experience about what's working, what the manager's challenges are, et cetera. I want to remind participants, we already have some questions coming in, but we do want you to, if you have questions, just filter them through the Q&A section, and we'll ask those as we go through. I had one more question for you, Paul. When you're talking to managers about people moving into their unit, are there any special things that you've been able to do in HR to encourage managers to really look carefully at internal employees as opposed to trying to go external to the market to someone who may have already done that exact role someplace else?
Okay, well, when I say persuasive, we really don't give them very much option. We expect a line manager to look at the internal candidates and the redeployment candidates as a priority. And the way we do that is quite subtle, but it's quite powerful, is that we advertise roles across internal vacancies and external, but we only send the CVs of the internal redeployment applicants to the line manager. They have to filter and assess those applicants before they get to see the CVs of those other candidates. And I know it's a bit, controlled, but ultimately you don't get the scenario whereby they look at somebody else's CV and say, oh, I wouldn't need to put in any effort to reskill or bring that person in. I could just get that from outside, and maybe they would take that decision if only they knew about that person. We don't let them know about that person until they've decided that the internal candidate can't fit with those reskilling criteria.
Great. So we have a lot of questions coming up, and so I'm going to move into some of those now because I think this is what our listeners really want to hear. I'm going to jump into one that kind of addresses what you were just talking about. And it says, can you speak to how you address performance issues when redeploying someone into another assignment?
Okay, so this does crop up quite a lot inside the business. We don't allow our redeployment process to be contaminated by people with performance issues. People with performance issues that need another job are not candidates for redeployment. They are people need to be able to do their existing job. And the worst thing that I think my 30 years experience suggests is for people to move performance issues to another location and another role. So we don't allow performance issues to contaminate our redeployment pool. And if you're a recruiting line manager, the point here is that the recruiting line manager doesn't want to see performance issues nestling in the redeployment population. They want to know that they are just people that have been in a project that has run through its life cycle and needs redeploying, and are good people.
Great. Here's one about more senior employees. It says, as you continuously redeploy your employees, how do you address situations where you have more senior employees moving into redeployment assignments and the work remain enriching not only from a skill perspective, but from a pay equity perspective? So I think this question is really about, do senior employees have an opportunity to move into redeployment assignments, and what kind of challenges does that bring?
So a straight answer is any person moving into an alternative role has to take the terms and conditions of that role. People can't carry forward and carry through a legacy terms and conditions from a legacy role that doesn't exist anymore into that new role. If they want to be redeployed, we'll support you being redeployed, but you have the terms and conditions for that role. And on the senior kind of answer, we have been quite decisive about, at some point in time, direct level in the organization, then we've not supported people having redeployment access. So we only use this to support the vast majority of employees, not senior directors. Senior directors, if they need to be redeployed, need to find a role without the kind of reskilling and redeployment. That's from a lot more of our normal people.
Good. Here's a question about existing employees. I think, you know, when we set up this webinar in the context of a lot of redundancies forecasted in the marketplace. But this question is about what do you do for your existing employees, and can that help forestall redundancies happening in the first place?
I think what we need, what we are doing, and what we, I think we would need to do, and I think everybody needs to do, is make sure our existing employees are navigating through this difficult time themselves. And I think mental health and resilience is the most important kind of immediate thing that we need to do for existing employees. It's not straightforward working from home for some people. They've got childcare responsibilities. People have concerns and anxieties about coming into work and getting into contact with other people, and making sure that we're very, very precise and clear about our social distancing requirements. So there's a lot of anxiety about, and we've taken some specific steps to make sure that the mental health of our entire population is considered in this very difficult time. So that, I think that would be the priority for us at the moment. Great.
And related to that, there's a question on how work councils and or unions figure into BAE Systems strategy for redeployment.
So I think we are a highly unionized UK business, and the unions are very strong. And you know what? They really do make sure that we do the right thing. So it stopped becoming they make us do what we need to do. It's become more of a partnership whereby in doing this, we're doing right by the employees and they can't see fault with us for doing that. And I think this redeployment process has been developed with the trade unions, is supported by the trade unions and really valued by the trade unions. So they really like this because it keeps the fundamental characteristic of a trade union is to keep their members in work. It's exactly that.
Of course. Here's a question going back to, there's two questions around the processes and systems. One is about skills. So what processes and systems are you using to identify skills needed for BAE Systems now and in the future, and skills surpluses or skills that might no longer be needed? And then a related question for this is, do you use any software tools?
No, we're not that sophisticated, if I'm honest. And I think one of the things that we need to be better at as an organisation in the UK is our long-term kind of skills management, resource planning. So whilst we see those issues on the horizon, the taking that horizon and not just redeploying into existing roles, but actually thinking about the training implementations that we could do with that horizon to ensure that people arrive when they are reaching a cliff edge of a project concern, redundancy kind of concern, can be already retrained. I think that's one of the better ifs that I think BAE Systems could be better at. So we're good at spotting that horizon and offering opportunities, but I think there's some better things that we could do about retraining. So always better things you can do.
Good. I'm grinning because a question has popped up. Are you only answering your own questions? And I would say no, every one of these is from the audience. So thank you. And I'm going to answer that live and move it on. Great. Here's a question from someone who says, generally when we evaluate and assess candidates, they must first meet the qualifications of the position. In this case, the internal candidate would not necessarily meet these qualifications when selected. How do you defend against this if you have multiple candidates?
In terms of, look.
It sounds like what they're asking is, you know, they have to meet the qualifications of the position. I seem to recall you were telling me there's, you have a benchmark of something like hitting 60% of the requirements of the position. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Okay, so clearly not every redeployment candidate applies for every role with 100% of the fit, be that qualifications, skills or knowledge. And what we're prepared to do is look at both all three of those aspects and see what we can do to support them. But we're not going to change a procurement person into a engineer. You know, that is a significant 3-year development program that isn't realistic to be achieved. But we are going to look at topping up things, doing special things that allow certain, it might not be a qualification, but it's the equivalent in terms of direct experience to kind of give people the chance that they can do this job. So that applies to skills and knowledge as well. We want to give people the necessary inputs, but they have to be in balance with the requirements of the job and within a reasonable timescale, say 6 months, in order to kind of go through that transition.
Okay. This could be a quick one. When you look at redeployment, is it always about full-time roles? Have you looked at deploying employees against projects? And if so, how have you done this?
Oh, a lot of redeployment is into projects, and it's full-time, part-time, it's job sharing. We will look at any combination of option to allow people to remain in employment. That's actually a fairly standard obligation, but yeah, we go a little step further in terms of the percentage fit that person comes with from their original role, and we're willing to take that and use the balance of the 6 months to take them a little further and get them 100% contributing over that period of time to avoid them having no option but to leave.
Yeah, good. One question, and this is on a lot of companies' minds these days, is about increasing the diversity of your talent pool. And this question is, how do you maintain a diversity of talent? And I expect it means increase the diversity of talent if your hiring is restricted to internal candidates only.
Great point. And I think, you know, what I would say is that we also have learned from previous kind of recessions that turning off our early careers programs in difficult times actually is really got to be the last thing you do. So we've, for example, we've got gone into the UK press with a clear statement that we're hiring as many apprentices this year as we did last year. And that kind of commitment is saying we're not stopping on bringing early careers and new people in, but we're also not losing people for no reason.
So, gosh, we've got a lot of questions, but keep them coming. I'm trying to scan through them and avoid duplications. This is similar to a question we had, but I think it's relevant. It says, what tools do you use to determine who to retain and who not to retain? This person says they work for a company who has a reduction in force process. It's not an easy task to accomplish.
Oh, okay. So this is selection for redundancy criteria in the UK parlance, and I agree they are not easy to conduct. We do have those tools available. They're tools that are often agreed with the trade unions or in consultation specific to the redundancy program if we are having them, and you know, they either involve factual issues like levels of sickness taken and a bit of service, but they also contain kind of skills and knowledge, line manager driven kind of assessments, and sometimes and more often a combination of the two. And that determines who, if we have pools of population where we have jobs that we have to release, we would go through a selection process in order to fairly identify the right person to leave. But I come back to, it is an exceptionally difficult process. And, you know, that's helped by the fact that we do it if people can't be redeployed. So that's not our first go-to solution for obvious reasons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, here's a real nuts and bolts question related to an earlier question on performance. If the employee is redeployed and it just doesn't work out after a few weeks or a few months, how do you address the employee's struggles? Do they return to their old role or, if available, or how do you handle that? I'd be curious as well to know how often that happens.
Very rarely, gratefully. So you're right, though. We've done a selection process. The line manager felt happy that they wanted the candidate, and the individual wanted to be redeployed. So you know, there is a real effort to make this work, but it might be that it doesn't work in reality once that person has arrived. Within the UK, people have a right to a trial period. If they personally don't think it works out, they can actually opt out and almost opt back into the redundancy program. So that's a legislative kind of requirement on the UK. But I think switching it to the line manager, what happens if the line manager essentially believes that they've made a mistake in the appointment of the redeployment candidate?
Yeah.
That is a tricky question. And there have been occasions when that's happened. And you know, I think there is firstly a challenge of, well, what is the actual issue? Is it a misunderstanding? Is it resolvable? But sometimes it isn't resolvable, and we do come to an arrangement that that person might well still leave on redundancy. But it's not often, thankfully.
Mm-hmm. Here's a question that's more of an overarching question. I think it gets to, you know, looking at redundancy and perhaps career transition support versus redeploying people internally. And so the question is, what are the specific benefits of redeployment versus career transition out of the organization?
So I think it's a case-by-case basis. So for our business, these don't necessarily all apply, but we get to retain capability and experience. We have agreements and arrangements in place that make our redundancy payments to be enhanced, and we avoid the cost of that enhanced redundancy payment. The employee themselves sees the fact that we've supported the employee, but actually one of the most powerful things is the colleagues of the employee that was facing that uncertainty, that are looking at how they have been treated, and that reflects well into how I think those employees see our relationship with them. So I think it's kind of, I think there are 4 dimensions to that, and maybe other business won't have all of those 4 dimensions, or they might have different ones, but those are ours.
Mm-hmm. Great. Here's a question on how employees go about applying. It says, are employees encouraged or discouraged from applying for multiple internal roles simultaneously, assuming they might be qualified for each role? So do you encourage them to do it sequentially, or can they apply for many at once?
So very good, because people will scattergun. They'll say, I want to stay, I want to apply for this, I want to apply for that, I want to apply for that. And we've got to kind of, it's not up to us really to say some of those are not serious applications, they're more desperate applications potentially. So we've got to look at each individual application on the merits of its strength of application. And we may well reject some applications that are simply not credible to the role that they're applying for. But the one thing that we do, which we learned from experience on, is that we don't allow the employee to retain more than one offer. So they can't kind of trade off this redeployment situation into a, now I've got 2 offers and I want to bargain my way up to a better outcome. So they have to reject one offer before they can take up another offer. So that prevents this kind of, I'll turn this to my advantage personally, rather than take a very supportive program and you know, take a little bit of the credibility out of it.
Sure. I'm going to try to combine a couple of questions. It's about reskilling. One question is, do you do any type of assessment to determine if someone's a good candidate, if they have the propensity for reskilling? And then the second question is, came separately, is how do you go about reskilling the employees? Is it something done by the hiring manager, or is it something you do in advance? Or what are the mechanisms you do to actually help people get reskilled?
So I think the main element of the normal kind of redeployment candidate need is what we call domain knowledge, not necessarily skills. Very often the underpinning skills are there within the employee, and that's what the line manager latches onto to confirm that they can employ that person. Because if you have to reskill somebody over 3 years, that's too long. So it's the main knowledge about the product type or the industry or the project that you're going into that is the reorientation part of what we do. We have got into taking electricians and making them into test engineers. We have got into kind of other kind of functional moves whereby people move across to not normally transferable job boundaries, but those kind of have a need for certain circumstances to warrant the massive investment those kind of commitments bring. But we have gone that far, and in terms of what the reskilling is, we could and have done use modules in our apprentice schools to send our redeployees into those apprentice schools. And, you know, we're talking about mature people going into an apprentice school to do some reskilling, and we would do that if we had the numbers of people to do that.
Okay. We're running short on time. I think I'll have time for maybe one more question, Paul. I think here's a good one that a lot of people will be interested in. How did you quantify this program to senior management?
So basically the business case is still back to the 4 benefits that I described. If senior management can see opportunities to put people into vacancies, they're going to be happy with that. If they can take the pressure off the numbers of people who are redundant that we have to answer for, why are we making these people redundant? If they can save money on redundancy costs and they can see an employee engagement kind of outcome positive with their employees themselves or their colleagues, that's difficult to argue around. So I don't think that it's too difficult, given we are a high profile employer. We are expected to do the right thing by British industry. And I think we stand up to that scrutiny, and the directors have signed up then. And it's become a way of life, as you said. So this isn't something that we make a conscious decision to turn on or off, depending on the situation. It is an underpinning arrangement that sits with every aspect of every kind of working day, rather than specific to a COVID-19 or a financial crisis. This is a solution that underpins how we do things in the UK.
Fantastic. Well, Paul, I want to thank you.
Paul Keats' correct question.
Go ahead, sorry.
A multi-union environment we do have, and I would like to say that actually the common theme of supporting employees sits well with all the multiple unions, and we bring those unions together to talk to them as one group. So we don't talk to them as individual, we always talk to them as a group, because they're actually on the same agenda as themselves. So we have one conversation with our multi-unions.
And it sounded like part of that question was even, you know, candidates might change unions as they went from one role to another role, which would be an interesting career progression, I guess.
In the UK, you can maintain your union membership, so there's not a kind of specific union for a specific job. You can be on any one of these our 3 main unions. So we don't have that environment, but definitely all the unions are on the same page about our redeployment support and are very complimentary and supportive.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your time. Thanks for everyone who participated. I will say we have over 25 remaining questions. What we might try to do is find a different way to answer those and get them out to you, because there's some really good, clearly a lot of interest in this topic. I want to thank Paul for your time and energy and answering all the questions and giving us a really good perspective of how this kind of program works for BAE Systems and how it might be applicable to other companies. Thank you very much.
And thank you. Take care, everybody.